Hello and welcome back to this next lesson of our Macedonia Baptist Church Sunday School classes. Well, this is session 8, God Renews, if you're following along in your book. Our text for today's lesson is Isaiah chapter 40, verses 18 through 31. So go ahead and grab a Bible. Take a look at that passage. We're going to go through in just a minute. I just kind of want to give a little bit of updates. I want to apologize, first of all, for the poor audio quality of my last video. I did secure me a new microphone so that perhaps this one will be a whole lot better. That is our prayer and our hope, at least. So at least it'll be able to be viewed and be able to be listened to, unlike the last one. So we have here in our lesson today, we have, as I said, lesson 8. The title of the lesson is God Renews. If you're looking at your book, it's session 8. Our passage again is Isaiah chapter 40, verses 18 through 23. What I want to do is kind of set the stage a little bit of what's going on in this passage. This chapter 40 kind of sets a kind of a break of the book of Isaiah. It's kind of a natural change of direction, so to speak. The first 39 chapters of the book dealt primarily with God's judgment against Israel and Judah and the nations. Assyria is the main power that's working in order to bring about God's judgment upon those nations. As we get into chapter 40, it becomes the Isaiah kind of changes direction, so to speak, a little bit, and the book kind of takes a different turn. The book turns towards more of the anticipation of Israel coming out of exile of Babylon. So there's a significant difference in what's going on as far as the tone of the book. As we saw in chapters 1 through 39, basically is very dark, is very very much a judgment oriented thing. The second half of the book tends to be somewhat more hopeful, and the language kind of changes somewhat as well. It becomes more of a poetic type of book, more of a poetic literature kind of a thing. So there's a little bit of change. So if you're reading along through the passages as we go through them, when you get to chapter 40, you're going to notice that things are a little bit different, that things seem to be a little bit more hopeful, things are a little bit better, as far as a little bit more difference in language. Some people, because of this abrupt change in the course of the book, have questioned whether or not Isaiah was actually the author of this book. I don't see that it's at all necessary to think that Isaiah is not the author of the entire book. The only reason that they would say that is that this second section tends to become more prophetic in nature. Kind of talks about things that are going to happen in the future. It talks about how Israel is going to become out of exile into Babylon, and it's going to talk about things that haven't happened yet. So if you are to consider that Isaiah changed, that the author of the book changed for some reason, it's largely because of a lack of a prophetic bias, so to speak. Some people don't believe that Isaiah could have had the knowledge that he had in order to speak to the things that he spoke to in the second half, because he wasn't alive. So they thought that somebody that lived beyond there wrote it, and as a history, so to speak, of how this happened. I think that's totally unnecessary. I think it's very obvious that God has the ability to inspire Isaiah to write down things that happen, that are going to happen before they happen. God knows all things, and this is a prophetic book. So therefore, I think it's unnecessary to consider that this is this section of the book is written by a different author. So let's kind of put that to rest. I don't think that's necessary. Some people may disagree with me, but they'll be wrong, and that's okay. People can be wrong and disagree with Adam Arnold. When you get to heaven, you'll find out I was right. Just kidding. But anyways, it's one of those things that I used to always say when I was teaching, that you can be a good Christian and disagree with me. You're just wrong, and that's okay. But as we look at it, I want to kind of look through the passage again. This is, like I said, it's a little bit more of a hopeful passage of scripture, a little bit more poetically written. And what we have here is we have Israel. Isaiah is writing to the nation of Israel, trying to encourage them that God is going to bring them out of their exile in Babylon, and he's talking about things. So it's a very hopeful book. It's a book that it's a section of the passage, that the section of the book that actually looks towards the future, as we said. And one of the things that the nations, as they are in exile, we're probably kind of struggling with is the fact that, okay, we're in exile. How is God going to cause this to come about? These are world powers that have us captive, so to speak, and we're exiled into Babylon. How are we going to get out? How is God going to do the things that he says he's going to do? And that's kind of what Isaiah and the Lord speaking through Isaiah kind of addresses for the nation in this passage. And he kind of talks about who he is and his power and his might and his glory. And there's some great things that we can learn in our situation here in 2020 America that can apply to us as we look through this. I want us to look, and we'll just kind of read through it. We're going to talk about break it down and talk a little bit about it as we go through, about what God is talking about and some things that we can apply into our lives as well. So looking at it in chapter 40, Isaiah chapter 40, verse 18, it says, "To whom then will you liken God, or what likeness will you compare with him? As for the idol, a craftsman cast it, a goldsmith plates it with gold, a silversmith fashions chains of silver. He who is too impoverished for such an offering selects a tree that does not rot. He seeks out for himself a skilled craftsman to prepare an idol that will not totter. Do you not know? Have you not heard? Has it not been declared to you from the beginning? Have you not understood from the foundation of the earth? It is he who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers, who stretch out the heavens like a curtain, and spreads them out like a tent to dwell in. He it is who reduces rulers to nothing, who makes the judges of the earth meaningless. Scarcely have they been planted, scarcely have they been sown, scarcely have their stock taken root in the earth, but he merely blows on them, and they wither, and the storm carries them away like stubble. To whom then will you liken me, that I would be his equal, says the Holy One? Lift up your eyes on high, and see who has created these stars, the one who leads forth their host by number, and calls them all by name. Because of the greatness of his might and the strength of his power, not one of them is missing. Why do you say, O Jacob, and assert, O Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord, and justice is due me escapes the notice of my God? Do you not know? Have you not heard? The everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth. It does not become weary or tired. His understanding is inscrutable. He gives strength to the weary, and to him who lacks might he increases power. Though youths grow weary and tired, and vigorous young men stumble badly, yet those who wait for the Lord will gain new strength. They will mount up with wings as eagles. They will run and not get tired. They will walk and not be weary. As you can see, a little bit of a different tone, a more poetic tone, and a more hopeful tone that's being being spoken by the prophet Isaiah here. So, as it turns out, as I said, that most likely the nation of Israel and Judah, as they're in captive, are trying to figure out how in the world God promises that he's going to bring them out of captivity. Well, how in the world can he do that? And they may be kind of questioning God's power and his ability to work through human events and nations and national events in order to for them to get their freedom. And God answers that question. It says in verse 18, "To whom will you then liken God?" He says, who are you comparing me to? It's one of those things that a lot of times I think what we do as Christians is we have a warped view of who God is and his power and his might. And God kind of uses the idea, Israel was a nation who was plagued by idolatry, who were always trying to replace God with other gods. And he kind of throws that out to him and says, "Look, who do you think I am? Who do you liken? Who do you compare me to? What likeness can compare with me?" He says, you create idols. You have craftsmen that take a piece of wood and he covers it in gold, or he casts something and he covers it in gold, and a silversmith fashions chains of silver. Says if you're not wealthy enough for that, you do one out of wood, and you select a tree that doesn't rot, and you hire skilled craftsmen to prepare an idol that won't totter. He says, who do you think that you're dealing with? You're not dealing with one of these little gods that are man-made, that someone has fashioned with their own hands, that a creature, an object of God's creation, has actually created with his hands. So therefore it's a copy of a copy of a copy, so to speak. He says you're dealing with God, the creator of the universe. How is it that you think that I can't handle getting you out of this situation? He goes forth forward, and he says, verse 21, do you not know? Have you not heard? Has it not been declared for you from the beginning? Have you not understood from the foundations of the earth? It is he who sits above the circle of the earth. He's saying, look, I transcend the creation. I am the creator itself. He says, well, don't you think that I can take care of you? Don't you think that I have all this under control? And he goes through and he says in verse 22, and I think this is very fitting for us, not verse 22, but well, let's look at verse 22. He says, it is he who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers, who stretches out the heavens like a curtain and spreads them out like a tent to dwell in. It is he who reduces rulers to nothing, who makes the judges of the earth meaningless. He says, scarcely have they been planted, scarcely have they been sown, scarcely has their stock been taken root in the earth, but he merely blows on them, and they wither, and the storm carries them away like stubble. He says, look, the things that you think that are so entrenched into the world that you live in, the things that are so powerful to you are like nothing to me. It says, I've been around forever. I'm the agent of creation. I've been here since eternity, and I'll be here for eternity. And you're talking about this little bitty speck of dust in the universe, this little bitty planet that I've created, and the time that I've created. And it says, these rulers and these princes and these people who are in charge over the geopolitical landscape of your time, they're absolutely nothing to me. They're like, little grasses that have barely been taken root, and it just, I scorch them and I blow them, and they're like chaff. They blow away. He says, who do you think I am? And I think a lot of times we as Christians, we have that mindset, is we don't have a true understanding of who God is. We think that the world around us is so big. We think that we ourselves are so big and powerful, and we don't understand that God is the creator of the universe. God is the sustainer of all things that go on. And if you look at this passage, God is telling the nation of Israel, or Judah, you hear he's saying, look, guys, this is nothing to me. These rulers and these princes and these kings and all this stuff that you think are so powerful, and so they're nothing. They're absolutely nothing. I could blow and they're nothing. They're gone. And I think that's one of the things that we can take to heart in our society today, in 2020 in America, facing an election year. And a lot of times we get so worked up. We get so worked up over the things that are happening in our political landscape here in America. We're looking at the politicians that we have and the corruption that's there, and the potential of an election. And I don't know where anybody stands politically, and I don't really care. It doesn't really matter to me. But we get so wrapped up into thinking that these things are so important. But the people who are in power are like the princes that is talked about here, and the judges that God's talking about here. They're here for a short time. They're here for a time, and they're here for God's purpose, to accomplish God's purpose, and then they're gone. I'm old enough to remember plenty of presidents that we thought was going to be the downfall of our country. We thought when this person became president that this is going to be the end. This is the beginning of the end of our democracy, and that we're not going to make it through this, and they will be president for 8 years, and then something else happens, and you know what? We've made it through. And I'm not saying that's always going to be the case, but what I'm saying is that God has a plan. And God puts leaders in authority. God puts presidents in authority. God puts our congressmen in authority, and our senators in authority. And all those people are there at the behest of an almighty God. They're there because God has placed them there. They're there for a purpose. And we might like the guy that's in the office now. We might not like the guys that are in the office now. Those people may change. But God's plan is going to continue on. God is in control of it. I think that's the big thing that we can realize, is that just like the nation of Israel, they didn't understand what was going on and how God could get them out of the situation they were in. I think we need to realize in our day and age that the situation that we may be in politically is because God has a purpose in that. We don't know what that purpose is. It's very possible that God has a purpose in order to bring Christians back into a right relationship with Him. Maybe this is part of God's judgment, the situation that we are in politically. Not just, and I'm not making any comments about particular candidates or anything, but just the way our country is going and the destruction that's going on and the problems that we're having. Um, Maybe God's way of working out something in the lives of the church and the lives of Christians in order to cause them to be drawn closer to Him and more drawn into doing the right things that we're supposed to be doing. So I think it's interesting to me that the Bible is always applicable to every day and age and every time frame and every situation. And I think it's very applicable in our situation that we as believers, we as Christians, when we look at what God is doing in the world, we shouldn't go through that with great fear and trepidation. We should be looking at what God is doing and trying to figure out what it is that we're supposed to be doing as a result of it. Not wringing our hands and having fits of depression about how the political landscape is turning out and how bad things are and how things could change and how we could lose this and gain this or whatever. I think what we need to be looking at is what is it that God's trying to teach us? What does God want us to do in this situation? And I think that's very important. I think it's very important that we understand that God is in control of it. That we don't have to fret over it. We don't have to get ourselves all worked up over it. We don't have to. I mean, we should be involved. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be involved politically. I mean, I have some very strong political opinions about how things should be and how our country should be run. Um, and I have very strong opinions about a lot of things about politics, and we should speak out on those things. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be involved politically. That's not what I'm saying at all. I think, if anything, the opposite is true. Good Christian people should be running for office. Good Christian people should be speaking out and saying what they desire and having an influence, especially in our situation in America where we actually have a voice. We can say things. We can campaign for candidates and for different issues. We can speak to issues. We have those freedoms still, and we should try to preserve those freedoms as long as we can. But what I'm saying is that we as Christians shouldn't be wringing our hands and getting all uptight and all fearful over what God has, because God is in control of it. It says, who is God anyway? We're not dealing with little chunks of wood that have no power that some man has made. We're comparing God, the Almighty God, the King, the Creator of the universe, to things that are earthly, menial, that are small compared to who God is. I think that's the biggest problem that a lot of Christians have, is that our God is just too small. We think that our God can't accomplish great things, that our God can't do anything without us. And God chooses to use us in the world, but He doesn't need us. And I think that's important that we realize, is that we as Christians, we should be doing the things that God's called us to do. No matter what the political situation is, no matter what our economic situation is, we should find ways to do what God has called us to do. And we should be sharing the gospel. We should be reaching out in love towards other people. We should be doing the things as a church that God has called us to do, to worship Him, to give Him glory, to speak the word of God in truth and in power. And I think that's one of the things that we need to realize, that God has just called us to do what we're supposed to do, regardless of the political landscape, regardless of the outcome of the election that's coming up in a couple of weeks, regardless of whether or not you think America is going to be doomed because of the results of the election, wherever you lie on either side of the political spectrum. We need to be doing the things that God's called us to do. That's all. That's it. And when we do that, when we're faithful to serve God, when we're faithful to do the things that God called us to do, God will take care of the rest. I think it's very interesting if you look down further in the passage. We see that God makes an appeal to the nation. He says, "Who do you think I am? I'm not one of your little objects of wood or metal that you've created." He says, "I am the God of the universe." In verse 25, it says, "To whom then will you liken me, that I would be His equal, says the Holy One? He says, lift up your eyes on high and see who has created these stars. The one who leads forth their host by number and calls them all by name because of the greatness of his might and the strength of his power. Not one of them is missing. God calls on the nation. He says, "Look out, go outside and look in the air." I think a lot of times that's important for us to do as Christians as well. When we start to get a little bit uptight, when we start to get a little worried about the things that are going on in our lives, go outside and look at the stars. Just look up. Turn off the lights of the house. Get away from the city. Look up at the stars and just count and see how many of them you can count. And it says here that God has created all these stars. The one who leads forth their host by number and calls them all by name. God has created each and every one of those dots of light in the universe, and He has a name for each one of them. And He says, and not one of them is missing without Him knowing about it. He says He's in control of everything in the universe. What makes you think that He can't be in control of your life, of this nation's political landscape? He says in verse 27, "Why do you say, O Jacob, and assert, O Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord, and the justice due me escapes notice of my God?" God kind of calls out the nation. He's saying, look, what are you talking about? You kind of have this idea that I'm not paying attention. What makes you think that? He says, when he says, "Why do you say, O Jacob, and assert, O Israel, my way is hidden from you?" Do you think I'm not paying attention? I think God is kind of being a little bit sarcastic here, and I kind of like it. I'm a sarcastic guy myself. But He says, who do you think you're talking to here? Do you think I'm just ignoring it? Do you think your plight and your situation falls on deaf ears? No, it doesn't. It says, he says, do you think that justice that is due you escapes the notice of my God? And basically He's saying, look, you call me your God. And, the sentiment that a lot of the Israelites had, or the nation of Judah had, was like, look, you're supposed to be our God, but why aren't you doing anything? And a lot of times we got to realize that just because God isn't doing what we want Him to do, doesn't mean He's not doing anything. God is in control. God is the God of the universe. God is involved. He's not the great God who created the universe, spun the top, so to speak, and has descended off and is off doing something else. He is intimately involved in maintaining the world, maintaining His universe, not only on the galactic level, as it said, as we're supposed to look at the stars, but also on a personal level, that He is in control of the things that are happening to us personally as well. I think that's fascinating to me, that the same God who controls the rotation of the planets around the sun, the rotation of the moon around the earth, and controls the tides, and controls the weather, and controls storms, and controls everything that we have no idea how it works, down to the atomic level and up to the macro level of the universe. He's in control of all of those things, but yet He still is concerned about the small details of my life and your life. And it's so interesting to me that we think that God is not in control. The Bible tells us right here that He is. Verse 20, excuse me. It says, verse 29, He says, He gives strength. He says, wait a minute, verse 28, He says, "Do you not know, have you not heard, the everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth, does not become weary or tired. His understanding is inscrutable. He gives strength to the weary, and to him who lacks might He increases power." It says, "Though youths grow weary and tired, and vigorous young men stumble badly," it says, "yet those who wait for the Lord will gain new strength." I think this is a beautiful passage. It says that young people are considered to be the strongest and the most vital and have the greatest vitality of all the humans on the planet. When you're talking about kids that are 19, 20, 30 years old, and I'm somewhat beyond that, as many of us in our church are. We see that the youth is supposed to be this picture of strength and vitality, but yet it says, but yet they grow tired, and vigorous young men stumble badly. It says, "But those who wait on the Lord will gain new strength. They will mount up with wings like eagles. They will run and not get tired. They will walk and not become weary." I think it's a great encouragement for us as we go through our lives and as we are tired, as we stumble, as we are struggling. Many people in our church are struggling with some health issues and things like that. That those that wait upon the Lord will gain new strength. That God will cause those who are faithful to Him, those who are waiting upon Him. That word "wait" is kind of an interesting word. It's translated differently in some of the translations. It's translated "those who have hope in the Lord," those who trust in the Lord. In some of the translations, the word actually means wait. I mean, those who wait, and the idea of the waiting there is not just waiting for something bad to happen, but waiting with expectation, not just waiting like you know. I might be waiting if I tell my kids to go clean the room, maybe kind of a little bit of a hopeless cause. It's kind of a waiting with an understanding that and an anticipation that something great is going to happen. And that's kind of the picture that he's saying is those who wait upon the Lord with expectation, with hope, with trust, or with faith will gain new strength. They will mount up with wings as eagles. They will run and not get tired. They will walk and not become weary. I think that's a great encouragement that no matter what happens in the world, no matter what happens in this next election, no matter what happens to us personally, whether it's a health issue, whether it's financial issues, whether it's a job loss, or whatever it is that we may face, whatever struggle and trial that we're going through, if we wait and we trust in God and we seek His will and we do the things that He's called us to do, we try to stay as faithful as we can to do the things that He wants us to do. He says, we will regain our strength. We will gain new strength. We will mount up with wings as eagles. We will run and not get tired. We will walk and not become weary. I think this passage is a great encouragement for the nation of Israel as they were facing uncertainty. It is certainly a great encouragement for us as well in our day and age as we are facing uncertainty as well. And I think it's one of those things that we can really take heart, that we need to understand that God is in control. God is a big God. He's a God of creation. He's a God that has named all the stars. He's a God that is unlike anything made by human hands. Why do we as people place our faith and trust in the wrong things? Why do we put our faith and trust in governments, politicians, of all people? Why do we place our faith and trust in our leaders, our bosses? Why do we place our faith and trust in our family? Why do we place our faith and trust in our own finances and our own strength when we have the God of the universe, the creator of all things, the God who can hold the rulers of our hand and rub them between His hand and blow, and they're just like chaff. There's nothing. Why do we trust anything else? I think that's one of the things that we need to work on as people and as a church. We need to realize that God is in control. That no matter what happens in our lives, God is big enough to handle it.